Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon. Not a lot today to talk about, not a lot of updates, nothing really new going on. We are set for the Kaguya release in a couple of weeks, but aside from that, nothing new in terms of updates from Bushy Road. Hey y'all, Future Colton here with a quick update. We tried to record this episode in advance because Brandon was going to be gone for a couple of weeks, and of course, after we finish recording this, Bushy Road catches us out by announcing that Quintessential Quintuplets will be getting an English printing, which is not what either of us expected, given that the first set's been out for a little while now, and the second set has been announced in JP. What they're giving us, however, is not the JP set. They're giving us something called the Quintessential set. It will release October 29th. It's a pre-constructed set featuring cards from all 5 of the JP trial decks. So it looks like it's going to be sold more or less as a complete set, 381 cards per set, including a playset of all 95 cards in the set, including promos, and a guaranteed signature card. Not to mention that each of those playsets will include a copy of each SR and triple R in the set, 25 total. So a lot here. Very interesting that Bushy Road is selling this as a set. The only variance between sets will be the SP that comes in the set, and the set will be sold in sets and cartons, not boxes and cases. 5 of these 381 card sets will come in a carton, so no word on if there's going to be a copy of each SP in the carton or anything like that, but we do know that if you buy a set of quintuplets, it looks like you're going to get everything, so again, that's based off of the one press release that Bushy Road has put on their website. Almost a stealth release kind of thing. They didn't make a big splash about it. We'll link to that in the description. When we have more information, we will talk about it in the future, I am sure. But we wanted to make sure that this got covered on this episode of Clock Talk again. Quintessential Quintuplets dropping October 29th in English. Appears to be a complete set being sold as a block instead of typical boxes and packs. And it will come with guaranteed SRs and triple Rs as well as a guaranteed signature. So, with that out of the way, we will get back to what Brandon and I recorded earlier. So, let's get right into just a couple of things that we wanted to talk about today. One, Brandon has been working on compiling as much data from Springfest as could be compiled, and he has organized it all into a lovely spreadsheet, which is now going to be available on our website for download. If you're interested in the data from Springfest, link to that in the description. Brandon, you've put the lion's share of work into this. What is in this document, and how does it help us as players?
So this document has the majority of set representation, and then looked at that set representation and looked at the matchups from each of the 3 different regions and put all of those together to kind of see a generic wins versus losses for each of the different sets. Just to kind of get a general idea of some of the different things that happened during the events. We also have the data from the number of decks that went X2. A lot of the decks that just fell short of top cut. Just to kind of get an idea of generally what sets performed well, what decks performed well, and what does that look like in a larger scope than just maybe looking at top 8 or top 4.
So yeah, near complete set representation. Again, a handful of decks from the AO region were not available, but aside from that handful, everything is here. Set representation, X2, top cut, conversion rate, all of those things, individual matchup data, it's all in this document, which, again, available for download from our website. Link in the description to that. Brandon, thank you so much for putting all of that work into that document. It's going to be really, really valuable as we get ready for what may be in-person regionals in the fall. Fingers crossed. We'll see what happens with that. But in any case, it's super useful information. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who thanks you for the work that you put into making that happen. The other thing we wanted to talk about today is something that's been going on in Weiss for a while now, especially English Weiss, since JKTCG closed shop. JK used to be the price guide. It set the ceiling for how much you should be willing to pay for a card in general, and it basically set the market for a very long time. However, earlier this year. The shop closed, and now Weiss players around the world are basically left looking for a replacement for JK in establishing market prices. And in this kind of Wild West time that we've been in, we have seen some absolutely ridiculous things happening in terms of what people are offering for cards, what people are spending on cards that a year ago, even 6 months ago, would have been nigh on unfathomable. And now it's happening all the time. There have been a couple of responses to this, some of which are not helpful, some of which are more helpful. There isn't a perfect solution, but what we wanted to talk about today is the best way to look for cards as a player who is buying in a post-JKTCG world. As we start this conversation, though, it is worth noting that we are not talking about SPs and SSPs and triple rares and SECs. We're not talking about special printings here. There is a difference between buying cards to play and buying cards to collect. You can buy cards to collect that you then play with, sure. But we are talking about buying cards at base rarity, trying to save money so that we can play the game at locals, at tournaments, for as little as possible. If you're trying to save money on buying SPs, this is not the conversation that we're having right now. Because SP prices are oftentimes all over the place. It's a very different kind of market. We're talking about buying base rarity cards to play Weiss, as opposed to trying to find SPs or trying to max rarity a deck. Just so that is clear. Not saying that these techniques can't be used to find, especially like SRs, other like alternate foil types. This might be useful for that, but if we're talking about signature cards, it becomes a lot more difficult. So, just so you know, that is not what we're talking about here. And I think the first thing that we wanted to talk about is not trying to replace JK with another shop. I see a lot of people trying to make Strictly Broken the new standard bearer for market value. No offense to Strictly Broken, which is an excellent shop. I've purchased from there multiple times. That's a terrible idea. And the reason it's a terrible idea is because JK and Strictly Broken are fundamentally different places to buy cards. June and his team ran that shop in large part to provide a guide for the English Weiss market. They did not make massive profits, nor was that really their intention. Their intention was more to stabilize the market than it was to make a profit. Strictly Broken, again, good shop, run by people that we respect, is fundamentally trying to turn a profit, which is not wrong. This is not, trying to dunk on Strictly Broken. But what they're doing is not compatible with also being the standard bearer for market value. UA himself has said that the shop exists to turn a profit. And he doesn't think that making Strictly Broken the new market standard makes sense. But there are many people who are trying to use Strictly Broken as a sub-in for market value, and it's resulted in some just insane prices on cards, especially on like the Facebook groups. No, you can attest to this as well, Brandon. People are trying to sell lots and decks and cards for just ridiculous prices. And some people are biting. And ultimately, that's not good for the game. It's not good for players who are trying to build and play. It's really not good for new players who don't know where to shop and don't know how to get better prices and are essentially getting fleeced by these people who are just marking up their cards and hoping someone bites. So in the interest of the buyer, we want to talk about what we do to try to save money when buying Weiss cards. And the first thing, which is incredibly obvious and not particularly helpful for stuff that's already been released, but it's to buy a playset as a pre-order.
Yeah, if you're looking at buying a full set of buying into something, realistically coming into a set where it's its first release of any kind of cards into that property, if you're diving in headfirst into that. If you're buying a deck, it may be better to single that out initially, especially if you've looked ahead and done the research ahead of time to figure out what cards you want in your deck. And I think that that's the biggest key that we're going to go into today is looking at research, doing the research ahead of time, putting in more effort onto the buyer than what it used to when JK was around. So going to one single source, kind of like what you were talking about, Colton, becomes detrimental because if that one source has those cards priced higher than other places, and you only go to that one source, you're then restricted to the pricing from that one area.
And I would say that that kind of goes into the next key to finding cards at a reasonable price. And that is there are multiple shops online open for business that will take your money and send you cards that we just do not talk about. It's either Strictly Broken, TCG Player, or the Facebook groups. There are other places. And we're going to talk more about TCG Player in a second, because TCG Player is in a very unique position, and a position that could potentially really help us as we're trying to get better prices on cards. However, if you're looking for a card, especially like a high rarity single, maybe from an older set, the best way to find it and to find a price is to literally take the card number and Google it. It sounds kind of dumb, but I cannot tell you the amount of money I've saved on singles by just dropping the card number into a search engine. You have to know which shops are actually shops, because there are a handful of scams out there. And for what it's worth, I'm pretty sure they're all connected. There are scam websites that will offer you a ridiculously low price on a card and try to take your money. It's very easy to tell. If you don't recognize what site you're on, click around and make sure that they're legitimate before you order, clearly. The easiest way to tell that something is a scam is if you go to their contact page or their about page, and the email address that they say is their support email is very suspicious and also not like a clickable link. That's a huge red flag. As long as you have the most basic level of vigilance, you will be fine and you will get your cards for less money. But that caveat aside, the majority of the time, the vast majority of the time, these are legitimate places, and there will be some listed. I'm going to put some names on the screen of places that I have personally bought from, that I've had very good experiences with. I've never had an issue with any of these places. They're oftentimes going to offer you a better price than what you can get from one of the major sources out there. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes the best price is available on Strictly Broken or TCG Player. Almost never on Facebook, though. I have only once, in the whole time I've been playing card games, made a purchase from a Facebook group that was less expensive than buying those cards from some other place. It usually isn't good value. And, maybe other people have had better experiences than that. I can't only speak for myself, but I can say with confidence that very rarely do I see a Facebook post with an offer that is cheaper than what you can get those cards for elsewhere. With, 20 minutes of digging. It happens. Not saying it doesn't happen. I saw a really inexpensive Data Live lot yesterday that was being offered for below market price on one of the Facebook groups. It can happen, but the majority of the time, Facebook is kind of a last resort. I think maybe you post that you're looking for something. If you cannot find it elsewhere, if it's one of those kinds of cards that's, an old promo kind of thing, and you can't find it elsewhere, that's probably when you post it there. But aside from that, very rarely are you going to get a good deal on Facebook. So yeah, literally just Google the card number and scroll through the first couple of pages of Google results and open each of the tabs that looks like it might have what you're looking for. And beware of the scammers. Again, all the distributors on screen, there's a whole list of them right there, are all legitimate people I have personally purchased from, would recommend to anybody.
And at the end, also is going to depend on your location, depending on what's going to be available to you.
I've built multiple decks on the backs of these littler shops that don't get as much press, but will offer high rarity, expensive cards at reasonable prices. The third thing that I think we really need to talk about is the role of TCG Player specifically. Local game stores that carry Weiss are hard to come by. Even like for Brandon and me, it's a drive to the closest thing we have to a quote-unquote local game store that carries Weiss. For me, it's an hour. For Brandon, it's 2. And, it's a drive that we're willing to make to go and play Weiss with people. But it also means that we know every card that's in that store. We know all the cards in the case. And, the limited boxes of commons and uncommons have been rated for a long time because everyone has dug through them. There's a limited quantity, and, no one even looks at that stuff anymore because we all already know what's in the case. TCG Player positions itself as a place where all of these local game stores can post what's in their shops in one place where people can then go and shop. For games like Magic and Pokemon, it's awesome because everybody posts to TCG Player, and TCG Player basically sets the price. And if a shop really wants to sell a card, they'll set the price lower. And that moves the market up and down. And as those cheaper cards get sold, the price goes up. It's a very supply and demand kind of a market for those games. For Weiss, it's a little bit different because not all the shops post on TCG Player. TCG Player is more limited. It's still useful because there are a lot of really good shops. I've bought a lot from Gold Star. I've bought a lot from WinCon through TCG Player. Good shops that don't have their own websites but put their stuff on TCG Player. For 98% of Weiss cards, TCG Player is going to be a perfectly fine place to go get your stuff. Especially if you can, order all of your singles from a certain set from a single shop, and then you just have to pay the $1.99 shipping fee. It's great.
Well, there's also it's just part of it's a limited amount of traffic on these cards.
Exactly. Weiss is already less popular, so the challenge for a place like TCG Player is that there's already this limited pool of sales to gauge the value of a card, and now, on top of that, only a fraction of those sales are happening on the platform. So TCG Player has launched a new user interface that more prominently displays things like recent sales, market value of cards, and that sort of thing, which honestly is useful. And it's useful for Weiss, too. Because you can see what has been sold on TCG Player and for what price in the past couple of months. And especially on high-rarity singles, that's really useful information.
And this is something you don't need a seller account for. You can actually, on your own account, see this up as you look.
Exactly. Is it subject to abuse? Absolutely. That system can be abused by bad faith actors who want to jack up prices. That's 100% a thing that can happen. But, by and large, it's a useful tool. If an incomplete tool, if a flawed tool, it is at least useful. But again, for the vast, vast majority of your card purchases that basically aren't high rarity, high demand singles, just go to TCG Player. There's nothing wrong with that. Most Weiss cards on TCG Player have multiple listings, especially commons and uncommons. Easiest place to get them, because you can get them for anywhere from 10 to 40 cents. And you'll probably have to pay one shipping fee if you buy from a shop that has all of the cards you're looking for, which, if you're buying within one set, they usually will. So TCG Player is fine. Like, it gets a bad rep for having cases of, ridiculous pricing, like the early play Aqua that, was being listed for upwards of $1,000 at one point comes to mind. And I think that's what a lot of people think of when they think of buying Weiss cards on TCG Player. And sometimes that is the problem, right? And in that case, you look at other shops, like we talked about earlier, just look for the card number. But I would say the TCG Player is, for the majority of Weiss purchases, the easiest place to use and the most affordable place to use.
TCG Player can be a useful tool as long as you continue to do your research. Doing that comparison against different stores, this is stuff that you would potentially do with other areas in your life as well. Like, for example, if you're trying to get a used car, you're not going to look at, oh, look, this is the first used car I found, I'm going to buy it. No, you're going to do more research. You're going to check it out. You're going to see what kind of mileage it has on it. You're going to see, and likely you're probably going to get it inspected by a mechanic at some point to make sure that the value of the car is actually what it is.
And you're also going to go multiple places, right? Like,
yeah, you're gonna talk with multiple. You're gonna go multiple places. You're gonna compare it against other dealerships or individual sellers. You're not gonna just settle for the first thing you find and expect it to be the best deal ever.
And that's in a market that has a literal book that has the values of all of its used vehicles printed in it. Like, there is no Kelly Blue Book for Weiss, and as much as we would love to have one, even in markets that have actual, like, authorities that value things, there is still variation. So, in Weiss, even more so than something like that, it's important to do research, dig around, look at multiple shops. And, TCG Player gives us access to multiple shops. And then there are plenty of places that have their own shops. So there are easily over a dozen stores that carry Weiss that you can buy cards from online. So yeah, that's how we try to buy cards in Weiss. And we don't have like a sponsorship deal or anything with anybody. We aren't affiliated with anybody. Like, one of the core values, I think, of like the Clock Tower is accessibility to Weiss, making sure that as many people as possible have access to this game, whether it's through, deck text and conversation, or through easier access to the physical cards themselves, easier access to playing games online, which is why we were such big proponents of Weiss Fight, why we've been so supportive of like the online regionals, because, Weiss is a wonderful game, and we want more people to have access to it because we want more people to play.
Yeah, absolutely. We want the community to be able to play. For many people, it's not about meta viability. It's about what's on the card.
Yeah, and I think that if people have access to the cards that they're actually interested in playing, and also, again, if you're not going to competitions, proxy. If you're just playing Weiss with your friends, or you're just playing casual games, proxy. But yeah, that aside, if you want to buy cards, here are some strategies that can hopefully help you find the cards you want at a price that you can afford. And with that, we are going to wrap this up. We will be back on Thursday to wrap up 5 cards, 5 minutes for Kaguya-sama, Uncommons and Commons. A week from today, Brandon will have a deck tech. We'll have gameplay for that the following Thursday. 2 weeks from now, back with another Clock Talk. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.